Hello, this is Dr. Mike, and welcome to week 2 of Management 300. I trust from last week's work that you've learned some great tools that will be useful for you in the future as you manage different employees or different companies or whatever it is your future holds for you. I hope you realize that in these very brief video conversations that we don't have the time to go in depth to each chapter and find the things that, the details. If we were in an 18-week class, we'd have much more time to discuss in depth, but I hope you get that from your reading. And I encourage you to definitely do that. Do your reading every week because you'll get much more than we have the time to cover. Last week we talked about the business environment, and we live in a very interesting time, as we said, in which business environment is a major concern right now. To ask ourselves what is the most effective way to operate a business. I hope you found some answers to that. And I think it lies with two things. One is communication, and the other is with leadership in the workplace. And those are two things that you can take away from last week's discussions. You will not be an effective leader if you do not learn to communicate. And that starts now. It begins with your classwork and your dealing with teachers and all the things that you do that you take for granted. Everything we're doing and you're doing as a student in Valley College is modeling for your role in the workplace. And if you don't do it now, the likelihood that you will do it in the future is very unlikely. So let me encourage you, be professional now. Don't say, well, when I am in a position, then I'll learn to be professional then. No, that is not how it operates. Learn to be professional now. Follow the rules now. Follow the directions now, because if you cannot follow directions now, you won't be able to follow directions when you have that wonderful job that you have always wanted and you want to keep it. And that's the name of the game, that you follow the rules. And so even when you're doing your writing, there is a way to write a formal paper correctly. Don't diss that. Don't slough that off as not important. It is just as much a part of the standard as anything else. You have a certain set of tools that you use as a manager, and you need to use those well. Email, whatever else you're using. You need to be very careful about that, and we'll talk about that later in week 3 about communications and realizing how that is a changing opportunity for you to communicate with the people within your company. This week we want to discuss the role of organizations and to achieve how they achieve a strategic objective in their fields, and how they make design decisions, and how they're organized or aligned with those strategic objectives. Now, you might possibly get to be a part of those meetings, and so I encourage you as you move forward in your academic career that you're preparing for that work career. Who knows where you might end up and what team you might be on that will be making these strategic decisions as you are moving forward. Excuse me. This week we are looking at chapters 7 to 11 and chapter 14. I don't have time to cover those all today. I'm just giving you the high points, but I want you to go back and read those carefully and understand what is going on here. First of all, every organization has some kind of design. It might not be to the level of a BMW or a Chick-fil-A or a Starbucks, but there is some design there. Or maybe the chaos and the failure of a company is the lack of organizational design. But organizational design are the formal systems, or the levers, the decisions an organization adopts or employs in the pursuit of its strategy. Maybe like Chick-fil-A, you want to be the #1 fast food chicken joint in the country. What is your organizational design? How do you get franchises to work? How do you pick the people who head franchises? Because every one of those are an extension of you, your organization, your particular strategic layout. So it's important that you have all these things in place, and that you're teaching those, and that you are impressing those upon your employee, because you are only as strong as your weakest employee. And so that's a very important truth. There's always a division of labor in any organization. Now, I'm not sure where you might have worked, but just think about the places that you have worked or are working. The labor is divided in certain particular ways. There's what's called vertical speculation. That's how much the employee creates, executes, administers activities in a certain area of the firm. If he's on an assembly line, or if you're on the front line at McDonald's or whatever, the vertical specialization is how many hamburgers you can put over the counter and get them right and please the customer and do your job correctly. Horizontal specialization are the breadth of activities that are performed in a certain job. How broad is it? How many pieces are there for you to carry out your job? And so that's very much a part of organizational design. There are advantages and disadvantages. You can create highly specialized jobs that can help develop expertise or competency in a certain skill or a function. As I worked at BMW, as I told you, I didn't always work in corporate communications. I started out working on the line, putting in gas tanks and brake lines, and I moved to logistics, and then I moved to corporate communications in the final stage of my career there. But in each one of those, in an assembly line, this was something that Henry Ford did not invent, the assembly line. He took the idea and he developed it. I think I mentioned to you last time, Westerners tend to adopt and adapt and make things work for them. So he took an assembly line that was very much already in place, and he adapted it to build cars. And he went from building about 5 cars a week to 220 a week just by that one innovation. And he did that with lessening the number of people or the number of tasks a person had in building a car. He didn't have to build the entire car. He just put on brake lines or gas tanks, and somebody else put on the other parts. And so he could specialize in a few good jobs, get them right, and have good quality with that. And they mainly did repetitive, specialized kind of nature of jobs that would help in quick and efficient training of new resources. So when you brought somebody to the line at BMW, we had to teach them to put in brake lines and gas tanks and other things that we did in our station. They didn't have to learn the entire car. They didn't have to learn how to put a motor in. They didn't have to learn to put a transmission in. They basically learned to put a gas tank in. So they could do that over and over. The problem with that, the disadvantage is that repetitive jobs lead to repetitive job injuries, using your wrist over and over. You end up getting carpal tunnel syndrome. That extreme specialization results in it kind of being tedious, repetitive work, and you don't have as much job satisfaction. To sit there all day and stick clips in a machine gets very redundant after 8 hours or 10 hours, 5 days a week, and you do that 20 or 30 years. There's just not much challenge to that, and your brain turns to mush, and you're not quite as valuable as you were when you came through the door. And due to high levels of job specialization, there is a lot of turnover. And we're going to talk about the value of human capital today, but one of your most important and expensive or valuable sources are the people that work for you. And to lose them after you've trained them and put money into training them is a great loss. There are some coordinating mechanisms within this structure that I want to just mention to you. There are organizers, or those that believe that more control is warranted in an organizational design to ensure that jobs are performed satisfactorily and efficiently. This is how it started in the 1800s during the Industrial Revolution. People before that literally worked in their homes as a family, man, wife, his children. Maybe they were cobblers and made shoes, maybe they made clothing, but they literally worked from home. Bringing people into the factory was much more about control than it was anything else. They wanted to be able to make you work the 8 hours and get the most out of you. So that act of clocking in at a clock machine and clocking out at 5 o'clock, they virtually said, we own you from 8 to 5. And so you do what we say. Many of the cotton mills of the early days did not even give bathroom breaks or lunch breaks. They had a spare hand that walked around and relieved you to go to the bathroom. You went straight there and came straight back. And they sold you a sandwich off of a cart, and you ate the sandwich while you were running your looms or whatever. So it was about control. It led to greater job standardization because you could control the quality. You didn't have 50 different women and men making shirts at 50 different locations, and who knows what the quality was like. It led to specific definitions of roles and responsibilities, because once you had to bring them into the factory, then you had to have supervisors and timekeepers and secretaries and hands to fill in when people went to the bathroom, whatever. It led to a job specificity that was important. So that's one approach. Then the bureaucratic approach is a rather extreme form of organizational control, in which these systems are tightly formalized and are characterized by a bunch of rules, by a bunch of procedures, by policies, by instructions, and they closely supervise superiors over subordinates. And so it is this kind of a prison galley slave mentality that doesn't work well. It is not useful in creative environments. When you want somebody to be creative and come up with ideas, then you certainly don't want the bureaucratic approach. So in looking at that, we see this chart is kind of helpful for us to envision how this should work. But bureaucratic has some advantages. It is efficient. You can withstand high turnover, provides focus for a diverse workforce, but when appropriate is in large, complex organizations. You have a lot of measurable tasks. You have price competitive, cost-sensitive industries. The clan approach, it elicits commitment, and employees are self-regulating. They can easily adapt to the environment, and when it's appropriate, is under uncertain conditions, quickly changing industries, work activities, difficult to measure. And it's very important that you hang on to your employees. Then the clan approach is one of those. So there are a lot of recent trends in organizational design. You have what's called a customer-centric model, and it involves coordination, connection, cooperation, capability development. Those things you'll see discussed in your book, and it would pay you to look at those. So in looking at organizational structure, we need to think about a couple of things. Compliance, commitment to the firm, based on a fair exchange, like a pay for services. There's a certain amount of compliance when people pay you for what you do. You work, you get paid. You don't work, you don't get paid. Then there's a level of identification, the commitment to the firm based on the sense of belonging. You feel like you're a part of it. You feel like you're appreciated, and so you decide you'll stay. And then there's internalization. That is when you're committed based on an alignment between the firm's values and your values. If you look at a place like Chick-fil-A, who majors on the fact that they're closed on Sunday, that they are a Christian organization that gives money to Christian causes, there's a certain amount of internalization where their people that work for them are normally young people, they're normally Christians, they normally are given scholarships to go to college. And so there is that internalization that it is, I laughingly call Chick-fil-A God's chicken house because it is tied into the religion so strongly, but it's a major part of this structure, the organizational structure of their company. And they don't have nearly the problem with staffing that other companies do. You all wear the same uniform, you have the same look, you have the same more values, and so it's easy to work together. It's much like working at a Christian camp or something to work at Chick-fil-A. So quite an interesting company. So when we talk about culture, we're moving into a organizational culture. The design will lead to that. I told you last time that I worked for BMW, which is one of the largest international companies in the world, and I helped them when we started the plant in Greenville, South Carolina. That is a culture. It is a German culture. It is particular mindset about how things ought to be done. And a culture is a way individuals in an organization kind of uniquely and collectively think or feel or act. They stay within that. Provides employees with a roadmap. You've got a set of rules for how work gets done, how people interact in the firm, and it responds also to humans' basic need for stability, consistency, and meaning. One of the things we have suffered during this COVID virus is this need for stability. Companies have tried to furlough their employees, the larger companies have tried to pay them and tried to help them. It needs to be externally relevant to ensure the firm operates successfully as its environment changes, but it is important that that culture be maintained. One of the interesting things we find in organizational psychology is that cultures do affect performance. A strong culture can lead to better levels of performance, working together, having common goals, having common ideals of quality, higher financial metrics, distinctive competitive advantage. It was insulting for us. Our biggest competitors, of course, at BMW was Mercedes and Volkswagen. All three of those are German companies. They've been around since before World War I and II. And so we had this competition about who was the better car, built the better car, which one built it more cheaply, and all these other things. It also will promote ethical guidelines that define acceptable and unacceptable behavior. The car business is one of the most notoriously cutthroat businesses in the world. In fact, I'm writing a book on BMW and the Nazis, but the ethics line there is one to be discussed, especially Volkswagen, which was a car started by Adolf Hitler. It was part of his campaign pledge, a car in every garage, and Ferdinand Porsche, who was an SS officer, built the first Volkswagen and got it into production. He later went to prison from Nuremberg for war crimes. Of course, we had to turn him loose to help us rebuild Germany as a buffer against the Soviets. But there's a lot of ethical issues because these car companies took prisoners from the concentration camps and worked them to death in their car companies. And so, when you begin to think about that, where do you draw the line ethically? Do you buy your car based upon a person's ethical performance over the years, or you just close your eyes to it and go on without it? Clarifies the roles, though, by being explicit about what is expected within an organization. So the type of competitive strategy that a company has will determine what you do as far as acquiring human capital. As I've said already, human capital is your most valuable thing that you own, and they're the ones who will make you or break you. But the strategy that's used will affect, leadership, and you need a constant feedback system. HR should focus on cost effectively increasing productivity, and there should be HR practices in place that collaborate across functions, and employees should be able to get to participate in decision making. And those are one of the metrics that we would define a far-reaching company as. Part of the job of HR in management is to analyze information about certain job tasks in order to provide a more precise job description and define the characteristics of the ideal candidate for the position. You see this now much more than you did when I started working, but you have interviews with management, you have interviews with current job holders. They come out and watch you work to see what you do. They send you self-administered questionnaires that will ask questions, and you benchmark with other companies. Benchmarking is an interesting term that you should be aware of. It means you compare your job with another company doing a very similar job, and you determine whether your pay and benefits is comparable or not. You want your pay and benefits to be compatible or competitive with your nearest other producer, whatever you're doing. The positions are compensated based on the required combination of education, experience, potential talent required to perform the job. It's not all about experience sometimes. Education has become more and more important in the day in which we live. That's now the first thing you put on your resume is your education, then your experience, because education, that's flipped. It used to be experience and then education. And it requires assessment of the business environment to understand the availability of workers. One of the interesting things about BMW is when we came to South Carolina, we had one other major employer in the state, and that was Michelin Tire. And Michelin was afraid that we were going to suck them dry of their talent that they had trained, that they had invested in. And every time a person walks off your job, having been there for a number of years, your company is losing something that it cannot replace. Institutional knowledge and how things work and how to get jobs done. All the training you've put into that person goes out the door with them, and you will never get that back. You may get other people that have knowledge, but you'll never get that particular knowledge back. And so they were very upset about that. They had to reach an agreement with Michelin. Michelin would only hire 10% of Michelin's, or BMW would only hire 10% of Michelin's workforce. One of the things they have learned in these layoffs that we've seen in recent years of people in their 50s and 60s is that you have to be very careful of that. If you lay off wholesale, because you really can. You can go to Clemson University and hire 2 engineers for what you're paying that 50-year-old that's been with you 30 years. But they don't have the institutional knowledge that 50-something-year-old has about how things operate. And so it's important that you think about that as a manager, that when you fire somebody or whatever you're doing to them, you realize that they have this institutional knowledge that's very valuable, and you don't really want to see them walk off the job and quit, but you do have to control how they operate. And then, of course, HR is responsible for training and development. This is your single, probably biggest expense as an employer. You want to train your people in the job. You want to develop them. A lot of companies will pay for a person's college diploma. If they'll stay with them and work, they will help them to move forward, to move up in the organization. You want to control, you want to hire and use your own homegrown people as much as possible. So training is important because we need to orient employees to business practices, teach skills with a new piece of equipment, educate on a new product and service offerings. Let me say this very succinctly and then we'll move on. The day has changed. You will no longer get your degree from Valley College and walk out the door and never go back to school. Human knowledge now doubles every 18 months. That means on that little postage stamp of a degree that you're getting, and it's wonderful you're doing that. I'm not disparaging that. I've got 10. They're all postage stamps. But the knowledge doubles every 18 months. And so you will be in school most of the rest of your life just to keep up with that little postage stamp of interest that you have in a certain degree. I can imagine IT information doubles a lot less than 18 months, but the standard is 18. So just think about that when you're thinking about studying, going to school. HR business strategies feed into one thing, and that is performance, inputs, and outputs. You bring stuff in, you make left-handed widgets, you turn them out, you sell them. There are a lot of things you're going to read about. I'm not going to belabor the point because my time is almost over about production. I hope you'll read that, take and think about it greatly, but you do have to sometimes take corrective action on people that don't do things correctly. So read that very, very carefully. This is your final 4, financial perspective. Out of the vision, out of the strategy that we've talked about, there is that financial perspective. A person, a company, an investor is not investing in the company just because he feels good and wants to give you a job. He expects to make a profit out of it. and there's learning and growth, where you've got to learn and you've got to grow. There is no finish line. You're going to be learning and growing the rest of your life as you move forward. And then, of course, there's the customer's perspective. There's the internal business process perspective of where you're going with all of this. And so, in closing, this has been a very quick overview. You'll go much more into detail in your reading. But think about what goes on in managing a company. These are the takeaways I want you to think about. Number one, human capital is your most valuable asset. Don't ever disparage that. Never take the attitude that they're expendable. If you take the attitude, well, I can always find somebody else, you probably will be disappointed. And then thirdly, the successful company always takes care of its people. And they don't consider that to be outside the ordinary. So this week, as you read, you study, you work, I'm sure you're going to find some great questions. You can send those to me by email, or you can put them on discussion board somewhere if you need to. But I'm looking forward to this section. Thank you.